you use the term third wave therapies. And even for me, having done some study and research in the area, I didn't quite get what that meant until I read it multiple times and really contrasted previous approaches to what we are talking about now. Steve, do you want to give a little more context as to what it means as a third wave therapy? Like what are the first two waves?
Well, the first one, these are in the evidence-based treatments, was really to try to apply principles that came from an animal learning lab. They're really great stuff, and you can do a lot with it, just rewarding and punishing and extinction and so forth. But then you got to deal with the human mind. And so the second wave was, how do you do that? And so cognitive therapy combined with behavior therapy produced cognitive behavior therapy, second wave. But the problem is some of the stuff that came in was common sense, but it turns out not to be really critical. That, for example, that you try to find what negative thoughts are and detect them, challenge them, dispute them, and change them. It turns out that's risky business. Sometimes works, but it doesn't work the way it's drawn up, and it puts you right on the edge of the cliff because you're now focused on what's weakest about it. You're creating new potential neurobiological pathways to exactly where you don't want to attend. And you start fighting with it, your mind is pretty good at fighting back. I mean, there's a reason why even kids' cartoons have, Goofy on one shoulder with horns and Goofy on the other shoulder with a halo, because even little ones know that there's like these mental fights going on, and that may be the last thing you want to do, especially if you're into something where high performance, where you may have milliseconds. You don't have time to disappear into the chatter. And it produced something that I think sometimes was actually either inert or at times even harmful. And so third wave, digging down to the process, what is really going on here? And it turns out it isn't what you think or what you feel, it's how you relate to what you think and feel. And being able to sort of take that, bend, focus on the present, and in there, what are the qualities that you want to put into your next moment? What Ben, I'm sure we'll get into this, calls about living your legacy. What is the thing you want to have reflected in your next little bit of behavior, and can you build habits around that? And so it is toughness, it is strength, but of a different kind. I mean, toughness doesn't mean rigidity. A rigid tree splinters with the wind, but you want to be able to have that strength to come back, but also the resilience to take those waves, to take those hits, to take the time where you're injured or you're on the bench or you're you've had a losing streak or you got in a batting slump or something. Or, your girlfriend just dumped you, or you had a scary diagnosis. Maybe there's something going on physically. All these kind of challenges that we're all going to face. Is it going to break you? Or are you going to have that combination of flexibility and strength to sort of bend and come back, be focused and move? And it turns out that's true whether you're dealing with anxiety, depression, substance use, or the challenge of physical disease, or running a company, or succeeding in high-level sports performance, or being in the special ops. They're pretty good evidence that some of these same processes predict how people get through a military training and click off their performance goals and move up through the hierarchy in a way that keeps them in balance and prepared to the next thing. And so it's finding its way into all these high performance areas. And I think that's a good thing for people.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned a couple of things there that I want to quickly touch on. One is the word processes, which we'll circle back to because we've said it enough now that we have to actually dig into it. But before we do that, you mentioned that the application of this work to a number of different fields. Clearly, myself and Ben from a sports performance background. There is Ben also from a special operations field, and you mentioned the application of it there. I think there was a great study, and it may have been through John Kabat-Zinn's lab a while back, but it was with Navy SEALs before they deployed to Iraq. And I mentioned this in a training exercise we did this morning, which is why I'm extremely clear on it. They did this with a group before they had deployed to Iraq, and it was optional. They didn't enforce it on anyone. But the amazing things that they found at the end of it were just really mind-blowing and did reinforce again the application of this work. One, better decision-making, better memory, and better task performance for those who took part in the program versus those who didn't. And even more mind-blowing was when they came back, that more of them came back. So without being too crude, there was more chance of survival in deployment and less cases of PTSD upon return. And this is all statistically proven out purely from the group that did the mindfulness-based stress reduction versus those who just went about their normal preparation for deployment. And I just wanted to reinforce that because it does speak to it's not hypothetical. This actually applies.
Well, these measures of psychological flexibility, this is not woo-woo. This is how it actually predicts these trajectories. And we've done programs pre-deployment, post-deployment, and measuring during a deployment. And you can predict what the trajectories are by the psychological flexibility skills. I mean, the samurais were meditators, and there's nothing kind of woo-woo about, being able to bring the attentional flexibility into the moment as a person in the military. Unfortunately, it's been hard to get into some aspects pre-deployment, less so post-deployment, because the Veterans Affairs here in the U.S. has adopted ACT as a mainstream. Even the chaplains in the military, you should know all the military chaplains are offered training in ACT. ACT, motivational interviewing and problem-solving therapy, the big three. And it's because when they came together, Joint Chiefs, et cetera, looked at it and they said, we gave the chaplains the task. What are you going to do? And they said, well, here's one that really resonates with what we're trying to do. And many of the deployed folks will go to their minister or priest or imam or whatever, rather than to shrink because you go on a list and stuff. So, but what we've shown is that PTSD, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, all of those kind of cul-de-sacs. But not just that, being able to click through your performance goals and be able to move up through the ranks and really be there for the people you work with and have that kind of emotional maturity to be a leader in a way that allows the people around you to be whole human beings and be lifted up by your leadership style. All those things are predicted by these same set of skills and processes.
Right. And so, again, set of skills and processes. We're going to, for those who are sick of the teasing, using those terms without telling us what they actually are, we'll get into that. You mentioned one, and I mentioned it with the study. We've mentioned mindfulness there with samurais being great warriors. That's part of the 6 processes, right? But let's just lay them out real briefly in as few words as possible, and then we'll dig into which ones both perhaps Ben and I have found most effective for the high performers.
Yeah, real quickly, you need to back up from your mind enough you can see what kind of judgmental, critical thoughts you're having and make some choices about whether or not you're going to be guided by that. You better be enough open up to what your body's doing, emotions doing, history's doing, so you have access to your thoughts, feelings, memories, bodily sensations in a way that's open and not running away from your own history. You'll be able to bring your attention fully to the present moment, inside and out. That's usually what people are talking about, especially with mindfulness training, and contemplative practice does that. But to do that from this point of consciousness that connects you in consciousness to other people, there's a person behind those eyes, and then to be able to take that attentional flexibility and focus on what's important by choice. What do you want to be about? What do you want to reveal? How do you want to be in the story that you're writing with your life's moments, and can you build habits around that? So those 6, you can chunk them as being more open, aware, and actively engaged. But now we've got 3, but if you want 1, being more psychologically flexible.